Angola, 3 billion. There are African countries that owe this money to the IMF, 1 billion Cameroon. I'm just picking them off, 13 billion to Egypt. I know Ukraine has just got 10 billion from the IMF, but African countries in poverty, with the poverty, are owing a lot of money. South Africa, 3.1 billion owing to the IMF. Do you think they should default to the IMF?
One of the things, and I think it is President Thomas Sankara who said it in 1987, that one of the things that we must do as African countries is to make a decision that the money is owed to IMF and the World Bank will not be repaid and are not repayable, and is what is going to constitute the first installment for reparations for slavery and colonization. But it is sad that international institutions which are created on the basis of sound principles are quickly manipulated and makes themselves susceptible to manipulation, and creates an environment where countries which are arrogant traditionally, their DNA is that of arrogance, who want to choose who your friends are, who want to choose who your enemies are, and then they shout from the rooftops about democracy and about sovereignty. It saddens to no end.
In the face of African government cooperation with the IMF, what does it actually mean? I looked at the latest IMF statistics. Angola, 3 billion. There are African countries that owe this money to the IMF, 1 billion Cameroon. I'm just picking them off, 13 billion to Egypt. I know Ukraine has just got 10 billion from the IMF, but African countries in poverty, with the poverty, are owing a lot of money. South Africa, 3.1 billion owing to the IMF. Do you think they should default to the IMF if they're going to ever get their countries' populations out of poverty? I know there's poverty in the developed world as well, but in the developing world, in Africa?
One of the things, and I think it is President Thomas Sankara who said it in 1987, that one of the things that we must do as African countries is to make a decision that the money is owed to IMF and the World Bank will not be repaid and are not repayable, and is what is going to constitute the first installment for reparations for slavery and colonization. And I hold that view. I hold the view that African leaders should be bold enough to sit in Addis Ababa and make a resolution that now that we have seen the French, the Belgians, the Dutch, and the British, albeit in a lukewarm manner, admit that they committed atrocities, we are unilaterally saying that what we now owe as loans constitute first installment payments, and then we go into other negotiations on the mode and quantum of payment. If they did that and they tried to sanction us, they cannot sanction all the 54 countries. The only thing that they can threaten us is military action. But it would be something that ought to be done. But who has the courage? Who will bell the cat? That is the perennial question. It requires something that is unanimous, something that is united, so that you don't have a few people running away and saying we are not part of it. But that is the only way. Remember that the IMF was created in 1944, and its architecture and orientation was designed was not designed for African countries. We are simply grafted into the IMF scheme. And the IMF, the way I look at the way it has behaved, is not a body that is a good Samaritan. They want to keep you in constant slavery. You can never run away. And the sooner African countries recognize that, the safer we'll be. Whenever IMF tells you that your economy is doing well, you must be very worried, because it means the exact opposite. And some of the monies that are owed by African countries are monies that, if countries look domestically, can actually be raised. But for some reason, we don't want to use our internal resources, both human and natural. And we find ourselves beholden to this latter-day Shylock.
Well, people can watch our program on Thomas Sankara on our Rumble channel. They owe, as of this month, around 282 million pounds, dollars, Burkina Faso right now. Why do you think it is? I mean, obviously, the IMF deny, they say they're a benign institution, apart from Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the former managing director of the IMF, found guilty of rape and of course Christine Lagarde found guilty of negligence, sentenced to a year in prison. She didn't serve it. Apart from that, the IMF say what you're saying is completely wrong. They try and help the world. What pressure is exerted on these African leaders to pay? I think I have Kenya's figure here somewhere. You know, I mean, they're free, they're democracies. What have these African countries got to worry about if they say, look, we can't be spending huge proportions of our federal budget on debt servicing?
Most African leaders are thoroughly compromised. They run governments, some of which are kleptocratic governments, where corruption is rampant, where wastage is rampant, where they themselves are not beyond reproach at personal level. And it's therefore very easy to intimidate them by telling them, if you don't play ball, if you don't behave, we are going to expose you. And that is why you find individuals who are in positions of leadership in Africa lack the moral backbone. A few leaders who have had that kind of backbone have always resisted the IMF. You could see it in the early days of people like Julius Kambarage Nyerere or Kenneth Kaunda, or even more recently, people like John Joseph Pombe Magufuli. They could stand up to the IMF because at a personal level, they held no accounts outside of the country. They did not have any skeletons worthy of note. And therefore, they had the moral courage. But the majority of the leaders we have now do not have the moral courage to confront the IMF.
But do you think the Ukraine conflict is having these echoes through Africa? Because we saw how the American-backed TPLF in Tigray were neutralized to an extent to be able to keep that Ethiopia-Eritrea peace deal going. We've seen recently the breakthrough on the Gerd Dam between Ethiopia and Egypt. Do you think the United States is taking its eye off the ball to allow, that is in effect allowing Africa to, certain parts of Africa to regroup and create peace and hopes for the future?
You know, there is this old saying that you do not trust the Greeks even when they bear a gift. It could be a Trojan horse. And I'm never one who thinks that Western countries and the United States of America, in its corporate sense, means well. If anything happens that is good, it is incidental rather than something.
Yeah, I just meant they're taking their eye off the ball.
Yes, they never take their eye off the ball. Whatever you see them do is tactical. If you see them moving out of something and you think that their eye is not on the ball, it's not. Their eye is always on the ball, and they may make certain tactical changes which you think are in your best interest, but they are traps, and they are meant to fulfill a grander agenda. And ultimately, they will come for your jugular.
There you have it, guys. So PLO Lumumba is always full of wisdom and, you know, has really powerful ideas. And his speeches really convey the notion of wisdom and what African leaders need to really always remember that Africa represents. And we're really hoping that most of his speeches can be adhered to and probably worked on to help alleviate the challenges Africa is really facing in the post-colonial era. But what do you guys think about this speech? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please share and like and subscribe, because that's the way you support Kwazemi as a channel, an Afrocentric channel, where we try to understand deeper issues in African history and hopefully develop a collective intelligence on how we wish to build the Africa we want to see as people of Africa. See you in the next one.